Welcome to Solo Ship Week 3. I am Squirrel Patrol. I'm joined by JM to win. JM, some big football results in the past week. Second place in the slant. How are you feeling?
How am I feeling? My wife said, how much did we win this week? And I said, we are ahead of schedule on making profit on the year. Like, that's where I'm at in my season. Nice little, I don't know what it was, 13, 15K weekend. But let's flip it over to you because you're a newly minted Millie winner. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, so I got my green button on RotoGrinders, or I should be getting it soon, right? They put a little thing on our profile if you win $1 million contest, or if you win like a solo Millie maker. So yeah, never really thought I'd win my Millie maker on a 2-game NFL slate.
Man, and on top of that, all the live finals, and then you knock it out in the 2-game NFL slate. That's pretty wild.
Yeah, I actually that's something like people, especially like people that I tell family or friends, like, oh my god, you can't, probably couldn't ever imagine this would happen. Like, no, I actually kind of thought it would happen at some point. But some of that is because I'm in these like live finals constantly, where it's I've got a 2, 3, 4% chance of winning $1 million. I think I've been to like probably 3 Draftkings finals with 5 seats out of 100, where the top prize was $1 million. So yeah, but I'm glad, obviously glad it happened.
Yeah, man, so cool,
Yeah.
so stoked for you. I mean, that's the thing. If you're like, we talk about this, but DFS is all about sample sizes, and you just keep putting in plus EV samples, you're going to make money over time, and those shots on goal. But obviously, those, like the big shots where you get that $1 million payout, that like that just creates that asymmetric growth in the bankroll. I mean, at that point, you're well beyond that just being part of the bankroll. But yeah, super cool to when Aaron sent that my way, and yeah, man, congrats. Excited to kind of catch some of that mojo and roll it into week 3. I mentioned at the start of the season, I usually start really slow because business stuff with OWS is super busy the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season, and my edge really starts coming into play around week 6, 7. So yeah, entering week 3, back-to-back profitable weeks. 1 week that was kind of whatever that is, 3x, 2x, 2.5x my weekly buy-in. Nice way to start, and yeah, hopefully keep it rolling here in week 3.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I actually didn't have a great week 2 on Sunday, and so like kind of thinking, end of the day Sunday, and throughout Monday about like, oh, I'm gonna have to like kind of recap on Solo Ship about where I went wrong on Sunday. Now nobody cares.
Yeah, nobody cares. No, that's well in the past. Yeah, I think that a week like last week, obviously we want to turn the page to this week, but this stuff's cool to talk about, especially we call it Solo Ship, like it's a single entry show, but I think what we really both enjoy is getting on together for a little bit and talking DFS. And that's probably what's most valuable to listeners because, again, DFS isn't about picks. It's about playing DFS. A week like week 2 is probably a worse week for you because so much of your edge is in understanding DFS. And for me, my edge is blending my NFL knowledge with my DFS knowledge. And last week was a week where I primarily won because my NFL knowledge was a lot better than most of the field. And so, I think the sharpest DFS players, that's not their edge by and large. And so they play what the edge is. And like on a week like last week, there were a lot of spots where I was able to identify like, oh, this is actually higher confidence than people realize. This is higher confidence. Like I had 40% Tank Dell or, whatever I had. And that spilled over to like 15% Nico Collins. I had like 25% Deebo Samuel and 25% Puka and 40% Keenan Allen. So like that last week was like, it wasn't me as a DFS player. It was me with NFL knowledge. And those are rare weeks. And so it was nice to be able to take advantage of it when one of those weeks showed up.
Yeah. So that kind of rolls well into week 3. Just in terms of, I think there's one big factor in week 3, and it's our first Coors Field slate of the year.
Yeah.
The first slate that really has a game with 1 point total that kind of exceeds all the others, and then that becomes almost a binary decision to start off your slate. Like, how much of that game do you want to have? Like, and especially for a single entry. And I should emphasize, like, if you were looking at like my $1 million winning lineup, like that had 2 backup running backs in it, like that is not a good single entry lineup for anything, probably for anything, especially for a main slate. That was a 2-game slate. I do not anticipate I'll be playing, any backup running backs in this one, and on a main slate. And I try to spread out, I think, more than most people in terms of like my player pool, and I probably still won't hit to all of the starting running backs, let alone all of the backups. But yeah, then it creates this question of like how much confidence do you have in the one big game that jumps out to you, which is the Chargers and Minnesota.
Yeah, it's a super unique week because it's easy as like a sharp DFS player to be like, well, everyone's on this game. So how do I build away from that game? How do I account for the ways in which that game could fail? But obviously, wherever we can, we also want to try to blend. Okay, but how likely is this game to hit, and how likely are other games to pass? And we have a lot of high team total teams, but there's not a high percentage chance of their opponent keeping up with them. And so, if Chargers and Vikings ends up being 28-24, 27-24, right? Each team scores 3 touchdowns, and the Chiefs score 27-30, and the Bills score 27-30, and the Ravens do, and the Jags do, like, then it doesn't really matter. But where it separates is when it's 27-24 with 6 minutes left, and the Vikings are down 3, and they get the ball, and they go down and score, and then the Chargers get the ball back with 3 minutes left, and they go down and score. And you don't necessarily have a high percentage chance of that happening in these other games. So I think it's important first to define that for people who it's very easy for these other games to keep pace, for the scoring for these other teams to keep pace, but there is a very clear scenario. I don't see, just understanding these teams and their strengths and weaknesses, which are somewhat misunderstood even in like the fantasy content space and the NFL content space. But even with their strengths and weaknesses being a little bit misunderstood, there's a very low percentage chance that this game just disappoints, and so I think that's critical to keep in mind as well. I remember it was a Chargers Cowboys game 2 years ago with like a 55-point total. And everyone's like, I don't see how this game could fail. And it ended up being like 16-20. This isn't a game like that. So yeah, like to me, I won't have any like emphasis on my builds on going out of my way to fade this game. And so I'm going to account for either, rosters where it's like, hey, 1 or 2 pieces from this game do really well, or rosters where the game as a whole goes off. And because one of those 2 things is highly likely to happen, either somebody from the Chargers is putting up a really nice game and somebody from the Vikings is putting up a really nice game, and you just need those couple pieces, or you need like 4 or 5 pieces from this game. So those are like of the 3 options of like fade, skinny builds, some exposure, and like all in. I'm going to have like that second and third across my builds and definitely like my single entry 3 max play.
Yeah, I'd be a little bit surprised if my main single entry roster is not a stack of this game. Yeah, to be honest. I might try to go in some different directions, right? And maybe, I might feel differently by Sunday. We'll see how the injury news starts to shake out. I'd be shocked if my main roster, like, that I'm putting in kind of the highest dollar contests, has no pieces from this game. Like, that'd be shocking. Because I think, yeah, like a piece from this game is likely to hit. So, maybe if you're fading, I think for Cousins is going to be the most popular quarterback. That's what most places are projecting. Like, even if my main roster doesn't have Cousins, it's going to probably have like Madison, right, or something like that. Maybe something in like they just decide to run the ball. But yeah, there's no, or maybe I'm playing a totally different game stack and it has like a Justin Jefferson, where it's like, well, maybe Jefferson's just getting all of the offense from Minnesota and the game disappoints like a little bit. I feel like Jefferson's like the hardest player to fade in this game. His chance, but he's expensive too, so that's a consideration.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm trying to keep in mind with Jefferson, we can't break down this game and pinpoint the way in which he disappoints, but also we know, like, it was incredible last year that he scored, it was like 29 plus points in half of his games. It was like 9 out of 17 games. That's incredible. Now Cooper Kupp did it like 8 out of 16 games a couple of years ago, but it's so that 9 out of 17 games is a wideout. And yet that still leaves half his games that were like low 20s or mid to high teens. And so I'm aware that there are going to be games this year where people are like, I don't see how Justin Jefferson can disappoint. And then he does, right? He scores 17 points. And yet I'm also aware that we can't necessarily pinpoint it. And so I'm going to have, like you said, I'll have some rosters that don't have Jefferson, but that have Madison or that have Osborne or Addison or Hawkinson. Almost all of my rosters this week will have pieces from this game and from both sides of the ball. And if this game doesn't hit, there's certain situations where it's the game everybody's on. It's so much more rare for me to be on the game that everybody's on. I guess I'll say it like that. Typically, if there's a game everybody's on, I see the price paired up with the chances of it disappointing, like in a way that I'm like, yeah, but I'm going to make more money over time, like being way underweight that game. And this is just one of those weeks where it's not like that. So I have to kind of adjust my typical approach. And if I lose because of this game disappointing, like I'll be okay with that. And I'll still have maybe 15% of rosters with totally different approaches. But yeah, it'll be like, well, that's okay, because I was able to identify that this game is that much better than the other games.
All right. Before we get too far into the show, we should do our hot takes. Yeah. Do you have one ready?
So I came up with one. Yeah. And so before I go out on a limb with this one, I'll remind viewers and listeners that last week it was Tank Dell. So if I get this one wrong, forgive me. But I currently, like, if Jalen Waddle misses, now he returned to practice today, but he hasn't been cleared from concussion. If Jalen Waddle misses, I might actually have 0% Tyreek Hill this week.
Okay, interesting. I'm going to go. So again, I'm 0 for 2 with the hot takes so far, but I've got my first non-defense hot take, and it's a wild one. But again, I kind of going for the directionally accurate that I think Desmond Ridder might be the leading rusher for the Falcons.
Whoa. I like that. I keep looking at that Ridder play and being like, because this is a week where there's a huge gap. To me, there's a huge gap between the top running back and all the other available running backs. There's a pretty sizable gap between the top wide receiver and all the other available wide receivers. And there's like a few quarterbacks who really stand out and a lot that are like going to have a hard time outperforming them. But if there is one of those, you want to find it because somebody else is going to find it if you don't. So I've been kind of poking around on players like that and like who could win a tournament this week that we're just not thinking of. That's an interesting one.
Yeah, I do. I think that it's going to be hard to fade that Chargers Minnesota game, but that those are two passing quarterbacks, and so is it possible that the quarterbacks don't hit or don't end up on the winning roster because there's one of the rushing quarterbacks, particularly one of the cheaper rushing quarterbacks, does get just breaks free for a 60-yard touchdown run, and then suddenly that is a massive amount of points that you are going to have had a difficult time fading. You're going to have a hard time winning a tournament without those points from that one play, and then it turns out that guy's not necessarily bringing his teammates, or maybe he's just got one teammate along with him. Maybe it's not a game stack, but then again, maybe it is, and actually kind of have some interest in that Detroit-Atlanta game as a winning ticket for this week. Speaking of which, more memories are made when you're there for live NFL action. And when you need tickets, Ticketmaster's got you covered. As the official marketplace of the NFL, Ticketmaster gives you more ways to find your perfect seat. Their interactive seat map gives you 360-degree previews of your section to make sure you have the best view of those pivotal plays. And if your plans change, Ticketmaster gives you more flexibility to sell or transfer your tickets. Plus, mobile tickets make getting in on game day a breeze, and you can even customize your Ticketmaster app to rep your team's colors. Find tickets today at Ticketmaster.com/NFL.
Back to our regularly scheduled program. The one of the things that I've been playing around with is, and I said this in my show with Pete a little bit ago, break down the numbers. Justin Herbert could throw for 350 yards and 4 touchdowns, and that's 33 DraftKings points. If this slate shaped up differently, I would be way under. I would still have a lot of exposure to the pass catchers in that game and the guys who can score touchdowns, but I would be way underweight the field on the quarterbacks because their price tags with their ceiling, it's not that attractive. And you can go back 2 years and Herbert did get kind of these 2 to 3 points a game running the ball. But ever since the rib injury last year, and he got healthy deeper into the season, we still didn't see it. We haven't seen it so far this year. So, that can boost him from that 33 points to 36, or he gets the touchdown and all of a sudden, that's 38 because it's a rushing touchdown instead of a passing touchdown. But we just haven't seen that from him. So that's to me, that's really outlier production from him. And so, yeah, I'm not scared. I'm not scared in a vacuum of these quarterbacks from this game putting up scores that bury me. The bigger problem is the way that the rest of the slate shapes up to where I don't see the cheap guys. If you find a cheap guy who scores 25 or 26 and these guys put up 28 to 30, you're in such better shape because you have a different salary structure. You can get a different high price piece that these guys can't, that these rosters can't get. So I'm definitely hunting for that. I haven't seen it so far.
Yeah, this actually it might be a week where my FanDuel and my DraftKings rosters and exposures are very different because I like the quarterback pricing on FanDuel is so like concentrated. Like it just doesn't disperse very much. Whereas on DraftKings, like you have $5,000 quarterback. So like on FanDuel, like the what is the most expensive quarterback is Mahomes at 9,200, but then like the cheapest, is going to be like Andy Dalton probably at 6,200, and that's just not as big of a spread as like on DraftKings. The quarterback pricing goes down to like what Dalton's 4,900,
Yeah.
Mahomes is 8,300. Like that's almost half the cost of Mahomes. And at some point, raw points matter, but Desmond Ridder is like what 5,000 or something. So if he's the guy that's breaking that long run, like I could see maybe even like that entire Atlanta Detroit game, like the pieces are a little bit cheaper. So if some of those cheaper pieces start hitting, then does that game like not need to score as many points to kind of be the winning game stack?
Right.
If a game stack wins at all, this week.
Yeah. Would you pull the trigger on Desmond Ridder on a single entry contest?
I think so. I think on DraftKings especially, I would. Like in DraftKings, I think my answer to that is a confident yes. On FanDuel, he scores a little bit better, but I think he's a little bit more expensive.
Yeah.
I still think yes.
You kind of swap certainty to a different position, right? Like, at Herbert and Cousins, they're probably not going to disappoint, but they're probably neither of them going over 30 points. Like just realistically, because 300 yards and 3 touchdowns is a huge game, and that's not getting you over 30 points. So like if you swap out and get the guy who does score 22 to 25, and now instead of getting your 30 points at quarterback, you're chasing it, at other positions, it is just like it opens up those pathways. Obviously and that's the thing, like you got like CJ Stroud is one to think about, but that Jags defense is so fast and they play a lot of zone. So to me, it's like you're in your third NFL game. Those spots in the zone are going to look open, and then that defense is going to close those holes way quicker than you're expecting. It's like he could score 9 points or he could score 22, 23. Desmond Ridder, they don't throw the ball that much. He could score the 11 points or he could score 22, 23. So yeah, if you get the guy who does it, it's really interesting. And people kind of start their roster at quarterback for the most part. So that's where they gravitate toward the most certainty. But if you swap it out and you're like, okay, I'll take, 5K wide receivers are always low certainty. So you take instead of 5K quarterback, and then you have more money to get that 8K wide receiver, 8K running back. Interesting setup for sure.
Yeah. So I guess one thing we should talk about is there's a lot of, there's weather. There is potential weather this week where it's supposed to be raining up and down the East Coast. That could create a number of games. I think like the Patriots Jets, like even the Baltimore game could be Baltimore and Indianapolis could be affected. The Bills and Washington could be affected. But then we also have a number of very low point total games. And like with scoring is down a little bit across the board this year. Like we're starting to see like more and more games, I feel like of sub 40 points. So like kind of looking at this, like the Patriots, Jets, like the Saints, Packers, like Tennessee, Cleveland, and like maybe even Dallas, Arizona. Like, is there anything that kind of sticks out to you? Like, I almost feel like writing those games off entirely, or maybe just taking like one piece. Like, like Tony Pollard in the Dallas, Arizona game. I don't know if I'll have a lot of anything other than Tony Pollard. And I may even be under the field on Tony Pollard. But other than the defenses, like it's hard to find anything in those games, like the Patriots, Jets, and Cleveland and Tennessee, like maybe in Njoku, but it's hard to find any players I have a lot of interest in.
Yeah, Patriots Jets is like on the surface, it's completely X'd off my list. I I've got Mike Gesicki in my MME player pool right now, just because he's playing 80% of the snaps. He's 2,900. Nobody plays him. But like as far as the guys who actually cost salary, that game's X'd off my list. Cowboys Cardinals is X'd off my list outside of Pollard. The Browns one, I've used this example of last year. I kept playing Tom Brady and Mike Evans and being like, eventually they're going to look like Tom Brady and Mike Evans. And I kind of feel that way about Deshaun Watson, but then I'm having to recognize like this dude looks bad. And sometimes it doesn't just turn around the next week. So, I mean, I like hammer passing attacks against the Titans because it's so impossible to run against them. And so more shots on goal is more opportunities for plays to happen. And I think our props insider package is like 7-0 on over bets for quarterback pass attempts against the Titans. So from that standpoint, and you talk about running quarterbacks, right? And Deshaun Watson's designed rush attempts from week 1 to week 2 doubled. Like from that standpoint, yeah, I want to take shots there. I will on large field play, but will I see one of my large field rosters and be like, ooh, this one's going in single entry with Deshaun Watson? That would be hard for me to do. That's the one game out of those ones though that I can I want it to happen. Not for Deshaun Watson as a person, but for DFS purposes. I also was looking through because Amari Cooper last year had all those 28 to 30 point games. 8 games with Deshaun Watson, he's topped 16 points once. So yeah, I mean it's hard, but it's going to happen eventually.
Yeah, actually, I remember coming into this season, I did like a little bit of best ball for the first time. I kind of ended up with a bunch of Deshaun Watson because I had this thing in the back of my head thinking that like a bunch of his low scoring games last year had kind of extenuating circumstances. Like I know there was like a lot of weather, like a Cincinnati game. And then I think it was like the same thing this in week 1. It was raining a lot in the Cincinnati Browns game for week 1. But I had this thing in my head that like Deshaun Watson is a potential guy that could do well this year. Like the box scores and game log, from last year aren't going to indicate. And I do wonder if this is the week because
he played the Bengals and Steelers, Bengals in weather, and then the Steelers.
Yeah,
it's not an easy setup.
Yeah, so like the game log like doesn't look great, but a lot of and I mean if he was playing in a division that had a bunch of domes, like maybe he'd be putting up much bigger numbers. But he's playing against Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Baltimore. So I don't know. Maybe he is actually a piece that would be interesting. Because he's that Russian quarterback. Was it the pass funnel, the Titans? And so I was thinking that maybe Njoku is the only piece from that game that I'd be interested in, but actually that is kind of an interesting case for Deshaun Watson.
Yeah. I'm gonna have some Donovan Peoples-Jones in large field play because he's gonna be 1% owned. Like I see right now, ownership is gravitating a lot toward the safe guys who don't have a ton of ceiling, and that might change with the weather. But like the Michael Pittmans, right, where it's like, oh, this guy's gonna get 10 targets. He probably won't get 100 yards. He probably won't get 2 touchdowns. He's playing the Ravens, but so then it's like. I want to, rather than taking those guys, I want to take the broad range of outcomes guys, the Gabe Davises, the Donovan Peoples-Jones, because like either they miss and I'm already behind the field anyway, or they hit and I jump over these safer plays. So yeah, Donovan Peoples-Jones has been in mind. Elijah Moore is getting 9 targets, kind of bankably. Amari Cooper. So I will have pieces of that passing attack. I don't know if they'll make it onto like tighter build, single entry 3 max. But when we talk about Deshaun Watson, then actually look at Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, that is a tough start. He's looked bad, like not just the box score, but he hasn't looked as good as other NFL quarterbacks. But this is a great matchup for a quarterback to get right. And maybe that's the winning ticket this week if we want to read the promo again. But no, yeah, I think that's actually, I've been back and forth on it throughout the week, but this discussion, looking at the actual teams he's played, it does make it more interesting again.
I have a broad range of outcomes guy that's a guy I always intend to be over the field on, it doesn't happen unless I manually change his projection. But Taysom Hill is somebody at a hard to fill tight end position where I wonder, he with the injury situation in the Saints backfield, I think we're down. Jamal Williams is likely to miss.
He's out. Yeah.
Okay. So then it's up to Tony Jones and like Kendrick Miller. I don't know. Did Miller get no? Miller's missed the first 2 games, right?
Yeah.
So like this could be a week where you get a running back at the tight end position, but like there's so much uncertainty and we don't know like is Tony Jones, maybe it's just Tony Jones is going to be the first down, second down back, and then Kendrick Miller is going to be third down back or something, some kind of situation like that. There's a huge amount of uncertainty in the Saints backfield that actually could be relevant for a game that I think most people are going to skip over, with just a 42.5 point total.
Yeah, last week, Tony Jones talked about, I think he's been in the league like 4 years, and it was his first chance to really get a chance to play. He's not typically active on game day, and he talked about like he didn't know until he was warming up that he and Jamal Williams were going to be the only 2 active running backs, and he said he was warming up and looked and was like, I guess it's just us, and obviously Jamal Williams got hurt, but that kind of tells us that in the back of the Saints' mind, they're like, yeah, we also have a third running back in Taysom Hill. And, Mike Johnson in our group text the other day with like me and Xanamir and Hilo and Mike said, how is Taysom Hill not chalk this week? And obviously it's easy to say why he's not chalk, but it's like, here's a guy who people should be paying more attention to than like 1% owned or 2% owned, whatever he'll be. Like my counterpunch is he's probably not catching many passes. And so then it's nice to get a 10 carry running back for 3,300 and fill out the tight end position. It's also early in the year where Dalton Kincaid is down here at 3,400 and people don't want to play Luke Musgrave after he disappointed them last week, but he's down here. And like there's other guys down here. It's not as thinned out as it is deeper into the season. So that's like my counter punch of like why he shouldn't be popular, because he has broad range of outcomes, but he could also have one of his 25-point games. And all of a sudden you're soaring past all the other cheap tight ends.
Yeah, like Dalton Kincaid and Luke Musgrave probably aren't going to get a lot of passing touchdowns, but Taysom Hill could, probably won't happen, but it could happen. I always think like, man, I'm going to put Taysom Hill in a tight end position. They're going to end up needing him a quarterback, and but it hasn't happened in a couple of years. But I do think his broad range of outcomes, right? Like we've seen him, I think last year had like a 37.
Yeah. 37 points. Yep.
Yeah. So
against Seattle, I believe it was.
Yeah.
And Seattle was like, and that was in the string of games where everyone thought the Seattle defense was awful. And Pete Carroll had been really optimistic about like how much better they've been playing. And then like that game happened. And he basically said like, we just weren't prepared for that, like what they threw at us. And there's always that chance that the Saints come in with a game plan where they're like, you know what, they're not going to be prepared for this. And, in a game with Tony Jones, who's literally just a guy, by NFL standards, and Kendrick Miller, a rookie in his first game, it wouldn't be a shock if Pete Carmichael's like, you know what we're going to do this week? Rely on Taysom Hill. So yeah, I think like the chances that are lower with Derek Carr under center because, Carr can do so much as opposed to like Jameis, where they're like, let's hide Jameis or let's hide Dalton and give the ball to Taysom Hill as much as we can. But yeah, I mean, it shouldn't surprise us if he comes out with a huge game. He has a higher ceiling than most of these other guys. So, yeah, most likely he scores like 2 while a bunch of these other guys score 8, 10, 12. But also he could score 25 while these guys score 8, 10, 12.
Right. Speaking of Andy Dalton, we might have an Andy Dalton sighting in Seattle, actually, with the Panthers facing the Seahawks. Is that a game you have a lot of interest in? That is probably the game I go back and forth on the most because we've talked a little bit about like Miles Sanders, and I feel like his price like keeps going down. And he didn't have a great game on Monday night. But then you're starting to get some really cheap pieces from that game that like could do well. Like I think like Andy Dalton, like Mingo, and then like I kind of like as Carolina as one of their off the board stacks. Then you can fit in like an expensive Seattle piece, and then maybe you're fitting in some of the expensive pieces from the other high point total games.
Yeah, I haven't even looked through Dalton's game logs from last year. Like I know that Olave's ceiling dropped dramatically from like Jameis Winston just slinging the ball to Andy Dalton because Dalton's going to be more conservative. But like I'm guessing most of his games are like 14 DraftKings points, 17 DraftKings points. Like he's still capable of that, right? And I think he had like one bigger game.
Yeah, Arizona.
Okay, so it was like a 32 pointer or something like that.
Yeah, 32 points against Arizona.
Isn't it crazy how
40.
numbers like that can? Yeah. You remember the 37 pointer from Taysom Hill, and yeah, those numbers just they stick in our heads. Yeah, like I haven't given a ton of thought to that game beyond like Miles Sanders getting 19 and a half touches a game so far, and that's going to keep happening. Obviously the Seattle side, because we know how Pete Carroll wants to play. It's been going on for over a decade. Like he only opens up the offense if he has to. He likes to play chess, and he always says like you win a game in the fourth quarter. So like he doesn't mind going into the fourth quarter in a close game with a small advantage and just winning it there. So can't expect the Seattle pieces to pay off their price tags unless the Panthers are putting up points. So I say that to say, like, I'm not on that game on that side of the ball, but you bringing that up, yeah, like, I've looked at DJ Shark just because what do you have, like one target last week, and people are going to kind of ignore him, but he's really good. And if he gets 7 targets, all of a sudden he can go for 4 catches, 100 yards and a touchdown. Probably won't be on Thielen because, you're needing the efficiency to pile up and the touchdowns, but who knows, maybe that's what Dalton's going to be looking for. Yeah. It's an interesting spot. I've looked at Hayden Hurst a little bit as a off the board tight end down there. That's a state of this week, isn't it? Like,
yeah, actually, I'm wondering if I have some Carolina bias because you mentioned Thielen and Hurst and they were on my roster. Maybe I'm reaching for this.
You're like, what's going to benefit me again. Yeah, I mean, it's not a great game environment. The chances of it going off are obviously extremely low, but I think it could have some utility just from a standpoint of what is available on this slate.
Okay. Any other games like on your mind? Any closing thoughts?
No, I want to mention we haven't mentioned Patrick Mahomes, but if there's one guy who's going to like really separate from Herbert and like in terms of raw points, separate from Herbert and Cousins. We touched on some of the cheaper guys who could separate in terms of like what they do for your roster, but in terms of just totally outscoring them. Mahomes in a blowout win, we saw it with the Jets 2-3 years ago where he was, Chiefs were favored by like 17 points and he was 2 or 3% owned and he put up like a 35 or 38 pointer because they love passing the ball. And so against the Bears, highest implied team total on the slate. I actually really like Patrick Mahomes, and I will definitely have more Mahomes than Cousins or Herbert. And then those two will be my next 2 highest owned quarterbacks. So want to mention that. Definitely like Mahomes a lot this week as well, and think that he's a potential way to separate from the field.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's a good take. That would be a pretty good hot take actually, because I think Cousins and Herbert are going to see much more ownership than Mahomes. But yeah, if Mahomes goes out and puts up a 40-pointer that you need to have to win, like you'd kind of feel silly just having glossed over him for an entire show without mentioning, with that being the quarterback you didn't mention. And that's definitely within the realm of possibility. I'll give a closing thought just to don't play 2 backup running backs in your roster this Sunday.
Showdowns only. Two game plays only.
Yeah. So that'll do it for week 3 of Solo Ship, and we'll see you guys next week.